Hello friends and welcome to my channel. Today I come to you on location from my retreat in Georgia. So sorry the lighting's all not that great and everything, but we'll get through this. Today I'm working on the Fort Worth Fabric Studio Winter's Night sew along, and I'm going to show you all the cutting. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is print out your instructions, or you can keep them on your computer if you like to read your patterns that way. If you print them out in color, you'll see all the fabric swatches here, which will help you know which fabric is which, especially because we have so many blues. So fabric A is this medium blue, which is this fabric right here. Let me move these papers. The first thing you're going to want to cut is two 5" by width of fabric strips, and from that you're going to get 12 4.5" squares and 16 2.5" squares. Excuse me. And then from the remaining fabric, you're going to want to cut 8 more 2.5" squares. So a total of 24 2.5" squares and 12 4.5" squares. So that's fabric A. Fabric B is our background fabric, all that glitters, the white sparkly, so pretty. So from that, you're going to want to cut 1 4.5" by width of fabric strip, 2 2.5" by width of fabric strips, 2 2" by width of fabric strips, and then 4 more 2" by width of fabric strips. But set those aside, those last 4, we're not cutting those up. From the 4.5" strip, you're going to subcut 2 4.5" squares. Then you're going to cut 8 4.5" by 2.5" rectangles, and then you're going to cut 8 2.5" squares. And then from the next 2.5" strips, the 2 2.5" strips, 32 more 2.5" squares for a total of 40 2.5" squares. Okay. And then from the 2" width of fabric strips, you're going to cut 6 2" by 12.5" rectangles. And then your other 4, like I said, are going to stay in one piece. You're not cutting these right now. Okay. So that is all of our background, or our white. I'm not actually sure if it's background, but our white in this project. The next fabric you're going to see is the All That Glitters trees. Let me grab those. And you're going to cut 12 5.5" squares and 3 4.5" squares. So it'll look something like this. So you'll have 2 different sizes. Okay, I'm gonna set those aside. This fabric is so pretty. I don't know if you can see the sparkle on camera, but it's gorgeous. All right, the next fabric you're gonna pick is your light blue blender. So this fabric here, and we're gonna make 12 4.5" squares from that. So that one is probably the easiest one. The next one is the glitter snowflake, which is the navy, so the darkest blue snowflake. And from that, you're gonna cut 1 4.5" strip, 3 2.5" by width of fabric strips, and 5 2" strips. So from the 4.5" strip, you're going to cut 8 4.5" squares. From the 2.5" strips, you're going to cut 8 2.5" by 4.5" rectangles. So these guys right here. And then you're going to cut 24 2.5" squares. And then from the 5 2" by width of fabric strips, you're going to cut 2 2" by 18.5" strips, and then you're going to leave 4 of those strips, 4 of the 5 whole. So these are folded in half right now, but I have 4, so we're going to leave those whole. So that's all of that. And then the last fabric is the Toscano Midnight, which is our darkest blender, our darkest blue, and you're going to cut 5 2.5" or up to 2.5" by width of fabric for binding. If you like a smaller binding, that's fine as well. And that's going to be our binding fabric, and that'll frame this project up really beautifully with this dark. All right, so that's all the cuts. Let me grab, I wanted to show you guys what was left over, because I always like to show you what's left. So from the first fabric, the sort of not darkest blue, but that's what was left over. So not a whole lot of that. From the glittery fabric, the white, this is how much was left over. So a little bit of room there. From the glittery trees, this is about how much I had left over. So you've got a little bit of extra. And then from the sort of lightest blue blender, we had quite a bit left over. I have all this, so a good amount. I just like to show you guys this just in case, because I know sometimes you like to know if there's room to starch, or if there's, you know, if you make a mistake, if you're gonna have extra. So I do believe there is room to starch with this. So this is what I had left over from the snowflake, so quite a bit of that. And I like a smaller binding, so I didn't cut 2.5 inch strips. So I had quite a bit of this left over. Now, if you like a full 2.5 inch, you probably won't have this much, but that's what I had left over. So there you are. There's all the cutting. Thank you so much for being here with me today and for working on this project with me. Next week, I will be back in my studio and I will bring you the tutorial for week number 2 for our first block. So I will see you then. Bye.